West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
This betrayal by the U.S. Supreme Court is where we begin this hour with Senator Richard Blumenthal. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you, Nicole. Good to be with you.
I believe you predicted that this would be the response from Chief Justice Roberts, but I'd still love to hear about what the next best scenario is for Congress to truly do the work of the American people who have, let me put this up, it is an extraordinary, it's not a decline in public support, it is a plunge. In the year 2000, 75% of Americans, according to Gallup, had a great deal or fair amount of trust in the Supreme Court. By 2010, it's down to 66. 2020, it's down to 67. In 2022, 47%. I don't think there's a single institution in American civil life, certainly not the one you serve in or the one in which I work, that has plunged that quickly, that fast.
That is a very, very important point, Nicole, because the Supreme Court depends for its authority and power on the trust and credibility of the American people. The Supreme Court has no armies or police force. It's supposed to be the least dangerous branch, as it has been characterized, because it has no physical force. And the only reason people follow the Supreme Court is a belief in its integrity. Now, I will grant the Supreme Court must be independent, but being independent doesn't mean that the highest court in the land is above the law. And that is why now a proper investigation is necessary. The Chief Justice, in effect, has very regrettably, even reprehensibly, dodged responsibility here. It will be a stain on his personal legacy. But institutionally, there has to be an investigation by the Judicial Conference, which he heads, or the Justice Department, probably both. But in the ongoing absence of action, Congress must act to uncover all the facts. And what's most regrettable here is that Justice Thomas has created the appearance that the Supreme Court is for hire and open to the highest bidder. In his case, Harlan Crow, who had leadership roles in organizations with cases before the Supreme Court. That kind of appearance of impropriety cannot be allowed to stand and stain the court.
Will the committee consider inviting Justice Sotomayor, who rather famously spoke about the stench on the court because of conservative legislative bodies legislating because of who had been appointed to it? I mean, would you consider inviting the liberal justices who may be more interested in being part of this conversation about ethics?
We should consider inviting other justices, but also subpoenaing other witnesses as well as documents. As a last resort, if there's no action by other branches of government with appropriate responsibility, either the judges themselves or the Justice Department. The Judiciary Committee should consider subpoenas for the justices who may be concerned. But, you know, the House Judiciary Committee is also a place where responsibility lies, because I think there's a need to consider impeachment here. I'm very clear-eyed. I have no illusions about the House Judiciary Committee chaired by Republicans beginning an impeachment proceeding against Justice Thomas. But I think Congress as a whole has a responsibility here.
Are you aware of any conversations that have gone on between the Senate Judiciary and the House Judiciary over just the idea of any oversight, or is that not happening because of the Republican leadership in the House?
I am not aware of any such conversation between our committee on the Senate side and the House. But I will say in answer to your question that the Chief Justice has been a little bit disingenuous here. Cases of the Chief Justice appearing before the Congress are rare, but there have been a lot of cases of other justices appearing before the Judiciary Committee or other bodies of Congress. And if he won't appear, others should.
Are you aware of any, I mean, I imagine a vote on a subpoena is challenging without Senator Feinstein. I mean, can you take me through where the conversations are among your colleagues about a subpoena for the Chief Justice or other justices?
I think this kind of consideration is just beginning because we've just received this reply. We're all hoping against hope that the Chief Justice would voluntarily appear. And I speak for myself personally in saying we ought to consider subpoenas. I think that we ought to take every possible action consistent with the independence of the judiciary, because we've asked them to do it themselves, to adopt a code of ethics on their own. So far, they have refused. And I think there ought to be an inspector general, along with a code of ethics, for the judiciary. But right now, we're beginning consideration of what our next step should be.
Part of the problem seems to be that Congress seems more concerned about the collapse in their integrity than they do. I want to show you something that your colleague, Senator Cory Booker, said this morning.
I read his words closely of the reason why he said he talked about it being a very rare thing for a Chief Justice to come before a Judiciary Committee. And I agree. It's a very rare thing when the United States of America, when our citizens, we are a body politic, see judges acting in ways that are so extreme and so out of line with what we would think would be basic ideas of ethics. We have a court now in crisis. And this is, again, not a partisan issue. We cannot allow our court to further lose its legitimacy. And we have an obligation to address these issues. And it should be done in an open forum.
Can you think of any precedent for an institution like the Supreme Court that acknowledges its own crisis? I mean, they all give speeches before, in some instances, special interest groups and other conservative gatherings on the right, where they bemoan the loss of integrity and trust in the U.S. Supreme Court, but they don't seem willing to come to the table to present itself as above reproach by having an ethics code that even just other federal judges have. What do you do about that?
Absolutely right, and I agree with my colleague, Senator Booker. And you made the point earlier when you led into this segment. What we face here is, to use your word, extraordinary. Absolutely almost unique in our history. Maybe with the exception more recently of Abe Fortas, who resigned. But I think this crisis really demands that the Chief Justice own it and step forward and help preserve the court's credibility as an institution. And what we do now, I think, is to uncover all of the facts, which is why a proper investigation ultimately, I think, will be our job to consider. We will need to take whatever action, and many of us are former prosecutors who know how to do investigation, whatever action is necessary to preserve and restore the credibility of the court. It is a crisis. It is the equivalent of judicial malpractice for Chief Justice Roberts to refuse to come before our committee and answer questions. It is another example of the Supreme Court saying, in effect, we don't have to answer to anyone. That's not the Constitution of the United States.
If you can't get the justices, will you subpoena Mr. Crow and others who have been the topic of investigative journalism about their ties to the justices?
My own view is, yes, we should subpoena Mr. Crow, anyone else with knowledge, and whatever institutions, including his business, for example, or maybe the Judicial Conference itself, which may have records that illuminate what happened here. And the point you make is also very important. So far, what we know has come from investigative reporting. The press has given us the information that we have about these years of hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts and travel, and now financial disclosures about Justice Thomas. And I put him in a class of his own, different from Neil Gorsuch right now, who failed to report that Brian Duffy, the head of a major law firm with potential cases before the court, bought his property. He didn't disclose the identity of the purchaser. Maybe it was a mistake. What Justice Thomas did in declining to disclose year after year is potentially criminal. And that's why the Department of Justice should investigate it. There are criminal penalties applicable to what Justice Thomas did.
It also seems, I said this yesterday, that the forms seem to be like sushi menus. Like you check the box you want, you leave blank the one you want. At the end of the day, I mean, do you also bring in whatever weak and unenforceable ethics officers are at the court and ask them what mechanisms there are to check that the form, I mean, you fill out a background form, you're going to work in the White House, and you do it under penalty of imprisonment. Clearly, these dudes are not filling out these forms with any fear of anything at all.
You know, there's a thing about enforcement that it creates deterrence. Prosecution focuses attention. And I think the judiciary has been lacking effective enforcement. That's why I have come to believe the judicial branch needs an inspector general. As you well know, every agency, every major department of the federal government has an inspector general, and they uncover waste, fraud, wrongdoing that can be prosecuted if it's criminal, and at the very least, the subject of civil action. Why should the judiciary be above the law? It's supposed to be most respectful of the law, and you make an absolutely key point that enforcement has to be part of any code of ethics. That's why I am developing legislation that would provide for an inspector general. I support other measures that provide for codes of ethics. There are a number that have been proposed, but I think something more in the way of effective enforcement is necessary.
It is Friday, the 28th of April of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunnar the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Indeed. Well, folks, we took the day off yesterday as a last-minute decision, in that, as you may know or have heard, or maybe you haven't, but my mom's little Yorkie poo, Ginger, passed away, and as they say, moved over and across that Rainbow Bridge, and I had her sleep with me that night. My day got totally destroyed yesterday, and I have to keep my time together, but I'll just tell you the story regardless. So she stayed with me for the night, and I would say, she was up and about, and I wanted to give her the solace of knowing that someone was nearby. And my mom, she's not able to take care of a dog like that now, and shouldn't have to. So moved her to my bed and gave her, some love, and she'd come up and kind of like, I'd sleep on my side, and she'd, sleep in the crook of my my posture and cuddling up and whatnot. And I should back up a little bit. For the few days before, she had gone outside and wanted to be outside and sit on the walkway in the sun and the cool of the concrete, and walked around the yard and lingered at all sorts of different spots in the yard and areas in the garden. Took a tour of the outside of the area, and it was kind of cute because every now and then, Gunner would be walking by and they'd stop and she'd give him some kisses, and then she'd move on her little tour. And then the day before she passed, or the night before, I'm sorry, before we started to bed down, she wanted off of Mom's bed, and she then took a tour of the house and went into all the little nooks and crannies that were in the house and looked at things and sniffed a little bit. Not looking to pee or anything, just she was on a tour. And went into what we call the spare bedroom, and I have a little sort of furry type blanket on the floor, and when sometimes she'd get up and roam about or need to go outside or whatever, and couldn't get back up on my mom's bed, she would go to that spot and lay and sleep and whatnot. So she laid there for a bit, and then I would go in to check on her, and then I could tell she wanted to be back with my mom. So took her to Mom's room and set her on the bed, and she slept with Mom for a bit, and she started then giving out these little yelps, obviously from pain. And that's when I decided that I'll set up these, puppy pads, or, incontinent pads, because that's really what they are. I'm not going to tell you that my mom's incontinent, but yeah, she is. So I put several of those on my bed. And she had a few accidents, and I'd clean her up and, get a new pad out. And then, I don't know, maybe I'm giving too much information here. Maybe it's too gory for you, but nonetheless, she was going. And I thought that, I had spoken with the vet and asked, what do I do? I mean, because I'd thought that I could maybe elongate. That's not the right term. I could, get her to live a bit longer and have, a comfortable little bit longer. And got some medicine and food things, to help her along with her kidney failure and all that. And I only got to do it like for a day. I'd gotten to the point where I was feeding her and giving her water with a syringe. I guess that might have been an indication, eh? Yeah, I'd set her in front of her water dish, and towards the end she'd make these feeble little dips, but wasn't drinking. And, she just wouldn't eat either, so I had to get something in her. So I was making her kind of a slurry of her food and a little bit of warm water, and mixed it up and then put it into a syringe that was big enough so that I could get it in there without it clogging up, of course. And you don't force that food down their throat. No, you put it in sort of like the crook of their cheek next to their teeth, and, let them not have a big chunk of stuff right there in the middle that could, choke them. So, she seemed to enjoy that a bit, and her ears picked up, but she just was very listless. When I say listless, maybe that's a little bit too before the fact. She was getting lethargic, and so carried her around a bit. But so she slept on my bed, and I just wanted to be there with her and let her know that she was loved, and she'd go through a little bit of pain or whatnot. And I could tell, dogs dogs don't normally yelp out in pain. They usually just sort of take it. That's what's weird about dogs. But she hadn't been in that panting state of pain, and then I could tell that she was kind of panting. So I just tried to console her, covered her with a blanket. Her feet, that was what was obvious, that her circulation was failing because her feet and ears got pretty damn cold. So I covered her up with a blanket, and then she slipped over. And it was, it's sad. They're not little robots. They're living things. They have an actual consciousness. Isn't that weird? No, it's not. We all know that. But, so I thought maybe, that I would get her to the vets and we could put her down, as they say. And that's what the vet had said. Otherwise, it'd be till Monday. And I was thinking, God, if I could get her to last till Monday without too much. But it was obvious that that was not going to be the case, especially early to late evening. So I thought, well, I'll get her to the vets on Thursday, yesterday, and call them first thing in the morning. And probably, as they had intimated, it wouldn't be until late afternoon when I'd be able to bring her in. And it got to the point where I was thinking, will I get her to last till late afternoon? Because that's, she's going to be in somewhat, she's going to have anguish. Well, one other aspect is that she was suffering from congenital heart failure, and we'd been attending to that for a bit of time anyway. So I think that her little heart just couldn't handle the added pressure of the kidneys failing. I think if she had a stronger heart, she might have lasted until next week with the foods and the medicines and whatnot. Maybe. So some might say, well, you should have taken her in earlier and put her down so she wouldn't have to go through that. I guess so. I don't know what it is. I always hated the idea. I think maybe all little kids don't understand. Why would you take an animal in to have it killed? They shoot horses, don't they? I guess so. Can't we just put a splint on the horse's leg instead of shooting him in the head? I mean, can't we try? That was my attitude. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe it is wrong. But in some ways, I think because her little heart wasn't really up to the task, and she was a fighter. She fought. But maybe it was fortunate that her heart gave out, because the kidney issue is not obviously a nice way to have to slip over to the other side. So there. And I guess they don't have dialysis for dogs. Maybe that will be a growth industry. I don't know. Okay, so that said, the reason that we didn't have a show yesterday is that there was a time in my life that I could stay awake for, a couple of days. A good 48 hours, maybe a little bit more. But not anymore. Jeez. I was just out of it yesterday. And I couldn't get a nap soon enough. And that was, in the scheme of things, quite late. So no nap for me until later in the afternoon, because we had all sorts of things that we had to attend to also, in terms of I had to get my mom to the dentist, another doctor appointment, which we also have one today. But I'm much in a better position because I actually got some sleep last night. And that's why we're doing a show today, because I am rested. There was a point where I was thinking, I don't know if I will be able to do a show on Friday. And there used to be a time where it didn't matter what my condition was, the show must go on. So I do apologize that we had no show yesterday, and we are we're going to repurpose the show notes and links that we had from yesterday and just put them in today. because I wasn't able to spend all the time to research and get myself a little up to snuff on some of the articles that we like to go through. So we'll just do the ones that we had in place, and sorry about that, but I'm glad, or I'm very happy that folks out there understand it. And I also want to say thank you to all of those who reached out and expressed condolences to myself, and more importantly to my mom, because that was my mom's baby. Gunner, the English Bulldog, I guess I'm his human. We're both his humans, but I'm more his human, as they say. So, yes, thank you for all of that. It helped. It did. And I got to say just one more thing. Little Ginger was a character, and, gonna miss her. Yes. All right. What do we have in store for you? I had to take a look at another computer that we have here so I can see where we are. And yes, what do we have in store for you here today in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this Blue Moon Spirits Fridays? Yes, Congress has a responsibility to investigate the Supreme Court over ethics concerns. John Roberts saying you can't investigate us is just another part of their enabling acts. This MAGA court is bestowing upon themselves the enabling acts, and we know what that means. Yes, sirree. On the rest of the menu, East Brunswick, New Jersey cops found large-capacity ammunition magazines at the home of a Republican candidate who threatened to light up his rivals. Yeah, they like doing that. A Missouri judge temporarily halted enforcement of a first-of-its-kind rule that restricts access to gender-affirming health care just hours before it was set to take effect. And the Minneapolis NAACP sued the city of Minneapolis over allegations that police officers used phony social media accounts to spy on its leaders and members. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Germany has stepped up surveillance of far-right party affiliates, and a federal judge in Brazil ordered a temporary suspension of Telegram, citing the social media platform's failure to provide all information federal police requested on neo-Nazi chat groups. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. A little reminder, Kelly will be in Chicago this year for this year's Netroots Nation, and we'll have another presence at another Netroots Nation, Netroots Radio at Netroots Nation. Thank you, Kelly. If you take a gander across from that chat room link that's near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the left and down just a skosh is the link to our Patreon site, and do please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. It really does help. And what does it help? Well, it helps us pay our bills and all the other costs that are incurred while running this powerhouse of resistance. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink and send those funds to us once a month, when pooled with like-minded folks like you and what we pull out of our own wallets, we're able to pay those bills and all the costs incurred. And they keep increasing, by the way. That's why I keep making these pleas. So thank you for your help. It really, really does help. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so by going to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter @JusticePutnam, and you can also follow me there at Spoutable and Mastodon as well, @JusticePutnam. I post those show notes and links, diaries, 10 minutes before showtime, and you can find them by going to my social media feeds, and the links will be right there. So there. You can also follow the show on Twitter, because we're not on Mastodon and Spoutable yet. I need to spend more time on the show account, I promise. But you can find the show on Twitter @Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found, mixed in with all the rest of us. We're there. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life, is by Sarah Salvador, out of Patch. That's a journal out there on the East Coast, because this is New Jersey. A Republican candidate for council in East Brunswick was charged after police found 17 large-capacity ammunition magazines at his house, according to the affidavit of probable cause. Under New Jersey firearms laws, the magazines are not legal to own or possess. Authorities searched the house of David Herrera, who ran for council as a Republican candidate in past elections, after receiving a tip that he threatened to, quote, light up the mayor and town council, according to the affidavit. This should be very concerning, considering that in the state of New Jersey, city council people have been murdered, not by this guy necessarily, I'm not making any connection, but they seem to have a little epidemic of political murders, to the point where mayors, county leaders are not running again for re-election because of these violent and in some ways fatal threats. On February 15th, a concerned citizen sent an anonymous tip to the FBI about a possible threat of shooting against the local government in East Brunswick, the affidavit said. Herrera, who unsuccessfully ran for council, believed the election was stolen from him, the tipster told authorities, according to the affidavit. Stolen from him? Where have we heard that before? In a conversation with the tipster, Herrera said he planned to light them all up, referring to the mayor and council, the affidavit said. After receiving the tip from the FBI, officers from East Brunswick Police reached Herrera's house to investigate. While waiting on the front porch, an officer found a rifle magazine on the top of a chair on the front porch. Another detective then retrieved a bag which was labeled PMag 25 rifle magazine 7.62 by 51 25 round capacity. The officers then determined that the two magazines were 25-round high-capacity rifle magazines capable of holding ammunition for an AK-47. Officers left the home with both magazines. After no one answered the door, they then contacted the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office. Based on the nature of the threat and the discovery of the high-capacity magazines, a telephonic search warrant was issued by Judge B. Buca Jr., the affidavit said. At 1:44 p.m., officers from East Brunswick and the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office conducted a search of Herrera's home. Authorities found 15 additional high-capacity rifle magazines which are illegal under New Jersey law. Herrera was charged with one count of a violation of 2C39-3J, prohibited weapons and devices. According to the incident report from the East Brunswick Police, several firearms were found at Herrera's home, but they were all legally owned and no modifications were made to them. Herrera was charged on a summons, processed, and released. He is scheduled to appear in court on June 9th, the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office said. When contacted, Darcona, the chair of the Republican Party of East Brunswick, said they refrained from commenting on ongoing legal matters until the conclusion of the process. We hold the principle of innocence until proven guilty in high regard, and we have the utmost faith that our legal system will handle this case with professionalism as it has demonstrated in the past. Hollow praise indeed. Jim Salter and Summer Ballantine of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A Missouri judge temporarily halted enforcement of a first-of-its-kind rule that restricts access to gender-affirming health care for transgender kids and adults just hours before it was set to take effect. The rule, instated by Republican Attorney General Andrew Bailey, places requirements on both minors and adults before they would be allowed to receive gender-affirming treatments, such as puberty blockers or hormones. It was set to take effect yesterday, but transgender Missourians and healthcare providers sued to stop it from being enforced, yesterday being Thursday, of course. St. Louis County Circuit Judge Ellen Rabuto said that she would like more time to review the matter before deciding whether to issue a temporary restraining order. She ruled implementation of the rule until 5 p.m. on Monday, saying she anticipates she will issue a ruling before then. Bailey has touted the rule as a way to shield minors from what he describes as experimental and medical treatments, though puberty blockers and sex hormones have been prescribed for decades. But the lawsuit claims that Bailey sidestepped the GOP-led legislature and acted beyond his authority in attempting to regulate gender-affirming health care under the state's consumer protection laws. Attorney Tony Rothert of the ACLU of Missouri told Rabuto at a court hearing that the regulations will cause immediate, severe, and potential irreparable harm for people who could lose access to medications that include puberty blockers and sex hormones. He and other attorneys said that transgender people who can't get gender-affirming care are at risk of suicide. Assistant Attorney General Joshua Devine argued that Bailey's order does not ban gender-affirming care. The rule will require people to have experienced an intense pattern of documented gender dysphoria for 3 years and to have received at least 15 hourly sessions with a therapist over at least 18 months before receiving the blockers, hormones, surgery, and other treatment. Patients also must first be screened for autism and social media addiction, and any psychiatric symptoms from mental health issues would have to be treated and resolved before you get the meds. Oh, wow. Some people would be able to maintain their prescriptions while going or undergoing required assessments. Devine said the rule provides basic procedural guardrails. He cited studies showing that a high percentage of kids seeking to transition are dealing with mental health issues. He said rather than transition, they should undergo Talk therapy. Talk therapy. Those suing argue that Bailey sidestepped the GOP-led legislature and acted beyond his authority. We don't allow attorneys general to legislate, Rothert said, and we do not allow them to play doctor. Associated Press staff brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Minneapolis NAACP sued the city of Minneapolis over allegations that police officers used phony social media accounts to spy on activists without a legitimate public safety purpose. The lawsuit, filed in federal court, alleges that the Minneapolis Police Department discriminated against the NAACP and violated its members' constitutional rights when it singled out the organization for surveillance on the basis of race. These are accounts that are supposed to be used for official investigations. There were none. Lillian Zaragoza, director of the University of Minnesota's Racial Justice Law Clinic and attorney for the NAACP, told the Star Tribune. Minneapolis officials have denied the allegation of social media abuse since it first appeared in a scathing Minnesota Department of Human Rights report alleging racially biased policing a year ago. But State Human Rights Commissioner Rebecca Lucero stood by the allegation last month when both sides announced a court-enforceable settlement that calls for a series of reforms from the police department in a city where George Floyd was murdered by an officer nearly 3 years ago. City officials told reporters they could not find evidence to support the social media allegations. Our findings are correct, Lucero insisted. At that same news conference, Minneapolis Police Department uses covert social media to target black leaders, black organizations, and elected officials without a public safety objective. That remains true. Minneapolis and state leaders have declined to release the underlying evidence, citing data privacy laws. Zaragoza said the city ignored the NAACP's request for the data, leaving black community members to only guess as to how deep the surveillance has gone. The NAACP hopes to learn the full extent of the surveillance through the lawsuit's discovery process, including the names of officers and whether any social media spying translated to any real-life action. Well, stay tuned for that. All right, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Camp and Vamp. If you're in the mood for a fresh take within the Dracula universe, the new movie Renfield might just be for you. To reacquaint, R.M. Renfield's an English attorney who did some real estate business for the legendary Bloodsucker in the past, becoming his familiar, blessed with limited vampiric powers, in which to pursue his goals, one of which is the caring and mostly feeding of Drac. This one's set in New Orleans, where the Count is recovering after an attack by vampire hunters. Renfield is scoping out potential victims at touchy-feely self-help groups, not from those attending, but from their abusive partners and bosses. Renfield himself comes to believe that he too is in an abusive relationship with Dracula and wants to break free, parroting morphisms from the self-help group, dressing in pastel knitwear, and fixing up an apartment like the set of a millennial-era workplace sitcom. Bringing this character off is the underrated Nicholas Hoult, who's got the comedic chops to milk the scenario just described. Stealing the show from a support role, though, is Nicolas Cage as Dracula, who's been there before in 1988's Vampire's Kiss, and he really sinks his pointy teeth into the role. In a subplot that sometimes comes close to being overwhelming, Renfield, while on Drac-feeding business, runs afoul of some local mobsters, leading him to team up with local policewoman Rebecca, played by an all-business Aquafina, with whom Holt develops some chemistry as they slice and dice their way through Nola's underworld on their way to dispatching, maybe, the thirsty Count himself. Ultimately, Renfield's an outrageous genre-clashing hoot, its excesses and misfires mostly excusable in the pursuit of laughs. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
We're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Book banning is at an all-time high.
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
The highest since the ALA, that's the American Library Association, began tracking this data 20 years ago. Twice as many bans in 2022 as in 2021, a year that itself had set an all-time high. Years ago, a local parent or community member might demand that a book be taken off the shelf. Now, there are demands for multiple removals, sometimes hundreds of books at a time, demands often made by organized groups, many national, that have a political or a social agenda. A few books have been challenged because they have racist language, but the vast majority of the books being targeted have LGBTQ themes. These groups don't want people to read these books. The director of the Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom is quoted in the recent AP story as saying that the last 2 years, quote, have been exhausting, frightening, and outrage-inducing. And the story is getting worse. Bills that do or may facilitate the restriction of books in public libraries and or schools have passed and or are pending in many states, including Iowa, Texas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Florida, among others. Apparently, the 21st century crusade of book banning has only just begun. That's a fearful prospect, which speaks volumes.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1965. That was the day the American Federation of Hosiery Workers merged with the Textile Workers Union of America. Hosiery workers had begun organizing as early as 1909. By 1923, the American Federation of Full Fashion Hosiery Workers, as the union was originally called, had affiliated with the American Federation of Labor. Women made up the majority of those employed in the industry. Competition within the industry was fierce and a major focus for the early union. From its founding, the union was known for its progressive stances. It focused not only on contracts, but also on social welfare programs such as pensions and health insurance. During the Great Depression in 1933, the union pushed for the founding of a low-rent housing project in Philadelphia. The result was the Carl Mackley Houses, a subsidized governmental housing project. The union operated a nursery school for residents of Carl Mackley and the surrounding community. When the Congress of Industrial Organizations broke off from the AFL, the Hosiery Union left with them as part of the Textile Workers Organizing Committee. In the spring of 1937, Pennsylvania hosiery workers held a sit-down strike. The strike was led by Emil Raiv, a Polish-American worker who had joined the union when he was only 15 years old. The strike grew to include 50,000 workers and shut down the Pennsylvania hosiery industry. The workers won raises between 8 and 10%. In 1947, the hosiery workers decided that they did not want to pay the dues increase required by the CIO. They left the organization and re-affiliated with the AFL. Finally, in 1965, changes in the industry led the union to merge with the Textile Workers Union. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all night hawks in the diner of life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 56 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low to mid-90s, with abundant sunshine, winds out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Some clouds this evening will give way to mainly clear skies overnight, with lows in the mid to upper 50s, and winds will be out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Mostly sunny tomorrow with highs in the upper 80s, low 90s, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then we have a precipitous drop in temperature on Sunday. Looks like we'll only be in the mid-60s, with a forecast of rain beginning late Sunday afternoon, early evening, and lasting through the week. So we'll see if that changes, but it looks like we're going to get quite a bit of water from the sky. Grass pollen is the prevailing pollen that's affecting all of us right now that have pollen issues. I know I do. Here in our little town of Rogue River, the air quality index for the region, though, is good at 15 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is moderate at level 5. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.95 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is down to 73%. So we are drying out until we're not. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that's why it's called the Weather Underground. London is 63 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 71 and partly cloudy. Rome is 72 degrees and sunny. Kyiv is 54 and fair. Kabul is 60 degrees and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 75 and fair. Tokyo is 61 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 68 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 53 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York is 56 degrees Fahrenheit with rain showers. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press staff brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Germany's Domestic Intelligence Agency said it had concluded that 3 organizations linked to the country's biggest far-right party had extremist goals that were in breach of the German constitution. The announcement means that the agency can formally step up its surveillance of the youth wing of the Alternative for Germany, known as the Young Alternative, the Institute for State Politics, and the group 1%. The intelligence agency said its investigations had shown that the Young Alternative rejected the integration of immigrants from outside Europe based on biological assumptions and portrayed Muslims in general negatively. It expressed similar concerns about the Institute for State Politics and 1%. Alternative for Germany has so far failed in its legal bids to block security agencies from observing the party and its affiliates. Germany's top security official, Interior Minister Nancy Faeser, accused the new right of trying to combine an intellectual and modern appearance with continued hatred toward refugees and migrants. Authorities will do everything to drain the breeding ground for right-wing extremist violence, she said.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Mauricio Savarese and David Miller of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A federal judge in Brazil ordered a temporary suspension of messaging app Telegram, citing the social media platform's failure to provide all information federal police requested on neo-Nazi chat groups. The move is regarded as part of the country's push against a rise in school violence. Later, several Telegram users said they could no longer use the messaging app after local carriers complied with the ruling. Google and Apple were also ordered to block the app. The judge also increased the daily fine for non-compliance to about $200,000 US from just about $10,000 previously, according to the ruling, which was provided by the Justice Ministry's press office. The ruling from a federal court in Espírito Santo State said the facts shown by police authorities show a clear purpose of Telegram of not cooperating with the investigation. Brazil's federal police confirmed in a statement that the push to block Telegram was already on course. The development comes as the country grapples with a wave of school attacks including one in November, in which a man with a swastika pinned to his chest shot and killed 4 people and wounded 12 in the small town of Veracruz in Espírito Santo State. Brazil has seen almost 24 attacks or violent episodes in schools since 2000, half of them in the last 12 months, including the killing of 4 children at a daycare center on April 5th. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Monday, so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.